Hello and welcome back to Prompt Circle, where we look at how to implement AI use cases into real-world applications. In today's video, we're going to be looking at OpenAI Assistants API. This was recently released by OpenAI on Dev Day a few weeks ago. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to build this into a Slack chatbot, which can be deployed into an organization. So I do strongly believe that, very, very easily you can get these OpenAI type assistants to work within, your organization as an internal help desk or any other tool that you might be wanting to build through tools like Slack, which are already existing in your organization. So there's no need to build a new interface or anything like that. You can easily distribute these assistants through Slack. So first and foremost, we're going to understand how OpenAI assistants work and what they are really all about. And essentially, the way I look at them is that they are your large language models with tools. All right, what if they had tools that actually allow them to communicate with your data as well as your business processes? And that's what we're going to be looking at today with OpenAI assistants. Now, the way assistants work is a little bit different from what you might be used to with using like the direct LLM. They've introduced a few more capabilities which you need to take note of. So simply put, the way the assistants work is that they do have access to tools such as a retrieval tool, which is something that you needed to build separately before when you're using any other LLM. So if you wanted your LLM to be grounded in real world information, you needed to build your own sort of retrieval augmented generation solution. But with Assistants API, this comes inbuilt. So you can basically upload files to the assistant and grant them access to those files, and they can use those files as a retrieval knowledge base. So the other thing that they have is they have DALL-E image generation built in, so you can generate images with these assistants. They have code generation, which allows you to run Python code on the fly. So for instance, if you're doing data analysis or things of that nature, they allow you to do those things pretty quickly. Very, very similar to what you see as well with, ChatGPT itself. So I think the easy way to explain assistants is that they are very, very similar to custom GPTs, but this is sort of programmatic access. And also the final sort of tool they have is what we call function calling, which allows you to generate the outputs that you can use to call your own functions. So whether they are API calls, interacting with a database, running some sort of logic that you have built, these tools, the assistant will be able to understand exactly what your tool, what your function is all about, and generate the inputs for your function. So we're going to be taking a look at how to build these out and also how to build it into Slack to make it much easier for you to actually deploy them in your organization or to use them directly. So the first thing we're going to do here is that we're going to go ahead and create an assistant. We are creating an assistant that is going to be doing a few things. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to create an HR help desk. This assistant basically answers questions about internal HR policies. So these would be expense, vacation policies, and we're doing it via Slack. Like I said, you can deploy a lot of these assistants. You can even deploy them as different bots inside Slack. It's going to have a retriever tool. That's the only tool we're providing to this assistant, which allows it to access your policy documents and provide responses when a question comes in. So basically, you're building an internal HR help desk. That's what we're trying to do here. All right, so first and foremost, we want to go into assistants and create a new assistant. Now you can do this programmatically as well. However, I think it's much easier to explain when we do it, using this particular tool. So you can click on create, and you can give your assistant a name. So we can call it internal HR bot as an example, and then you provide instructions for your bot. Now, In providing instructions here, we're just going to simply say you are a helpful assistant that provides answers to users who have questions about internal policies. Okay, you will be using the information contained in the knowledge base provided in the context to answer questions. And we can also add things like you are being used in Slack, so provide responses in Slack Markdown, including the use of emojis where necessary. Okay, so you can just basically give it this. Now this is what we're going to do. Now we can select a model. So typically for assistants, you can use any of the chat models, so GPT-4 Turbo or GPT 3.5 Turbo. Now I find that GPT-4 1106 obviously is the best model, but for retrieval we can use 3.5 Turbo. It's much faster, so we can just use that. Now when it comes to tools, in this case the only tool that we need here is a retrieval tool, because we're just simply doing retrieval type stuff. So we can just simply add our retrieval tool, and next up we're going to go ahead and add files. Now you can add as many files as you want. I believe there is a limit of 512 MB for each file. Now for retrieval, currently they only support PDF, if I believe so, and TXT if I'm correct. So you can go ahead and find your files. So I do have an expense policy document, which is what I want to upload here. So I'm going to call expense policy document. So let's find that. So I have an expense reimbursement policy document, which I'm going to upload. And once again, you can upload as many documents as you want. Just for our example, I'm just adding this one specifically. So this contains a policy around expenses. So we're going to be querying this information from our assistant. So that's it. Essentially, you hit the save button and your assistant is created. Now keep in mind that if you were doing this, with a vector store or you're using any other mechanism for retrieval augmented generation, then the setup is a little bit more complex. So what OpenAI has done with assistants is to kind of simplify this particular aspect of it. So you don't need to worry about the embeddings and the vectorization and storing all of these documents. All you really need to do is to provide the assistant with files. Now keep in mind that you can also provide these files directly to the assistant programmatically as well. So everything we're doing here can be done programmatically. So now that we have our assistant created, we can go ahead and test our assistant. So it brings you here into this page where you can really sort of start to call the assistant directly. So let's just ask a simple question. I can ask a question something like, what is the policy on expensing breakfasts and other meals? Is there a limit? So I ask the question and I click on add and run, and what happens here is that, very similar to what you would get with GPT, seems like we're having an issue here, so I'm just going to refresh this one time and ask my question again. Okay, so what is the policy on expensing breakfast and other meals? Is there a limit? So it says the policy allows for reimbursement of meals with specific amounts for each meal. So this is pulling directly from that document, is pulling in from the information that it got. And also, it does also show us exactly where it's pulling this information from. So you can see like it's providing like a reference from the file that we just uploaded, and essentially that is how it works. Now, one key thing to understand about OpenAI Assistants, and I love this about OpenAI Assistants especially, is that it also handles the memory, right? So the long-term memory of your assistant is handled by OpenAI. That is another thing that you would have had to handle yourself. So if you've kind of looked at my previous videos, I've made videos about building directly using the GPT model. And in those videos, we also had to handle it. I think in one of the videos, I talked about how to handle memory, and you start to see that it starts to get complex. You have to store the memory, you have to sort of retrieve it back, you have to, attach it to your call and things like that. So that is sort of abstracted away from you when you're using assistants, so which is a very, very big thing. So they're built in their retrieval augmented generation by allowing you to upload your files directly to your assistant, and they also built in this memory management, which allows you to kind of manage memories. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when you're working with assistants in terms of how it works is that when you start a conversation, it's started as a thread. So an assistant has threads. So each thread contains messages. There are user messages and there are assistant messages. So user messages are from the user who's using your tool, and the assistant messages are their responses. So it maintains this thread, and this makes sense because this is the way, if you're using it in Slack, for instance, people have stack threads about specific topics. So you can decide sort of how you want to map your thread in your real world application. For me personally, I think if you're providing it as a chatbot, for each user, you should be creating a thread. So when a user starts a conversation with the chatbot, that should be a thread, and that thread should contain all the information about the back and forth, so the user's message and the assistant's message in that particular conversation. So that allows you to kind of keep memory for context. So I can kind of go back and and see the past conversations I had inside that thread. So this is a really beautiful way of organizing this, and this is sort of a lot of heavy lifting, and I think that's what assistants bring to the table. There's a lot of heavy lifting that OpenAI is taking away from how you implement these LLMs in real world chatbot solutions. So we're going to take a look at how to do this inside Slack. But to do that, first and foremost, what we need to do is to go back into our assistant. And the most important thing here is going to be the assistant ID. So look at our assistant ID right here. You want to copy this because we're going to be using it when we're making our calls to the Assistants API. Now, I'm not going to go through every single thing in the Assistants API. I'm going to do that gradually in multiple videos. But for today, we're going to be looking at how to create a thread and how to add messages to that thread, because that's basically how you're sending messages and you're getting responses back. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's jump straight into the code and take a look at how this works. So I already wrote the code and I'm just going to be stepping through it gradually here. So right here, of course, we need our OpenAI to be imported. You also need, to kind of bring in your OpenAI API key and store them in as your environment variables. Now, to kind of initialize OpenAI, as I'm doing here, I'm just basically setting my client to OpenAI.client. Okay, so that's basically all I need to do there to get it initialized. Like I said, make sure that you have your OpenAI API key inside your .env environment. So I have a function here called process thread with assistant, and this function basically is going to be responsible for creating a new thread whenever the function is called. We're going to be also adding messages into this thread after it's been created. So the first step here is creating the thread. So you see thread is equal to client.beta.threads.create. This creates a new thread. Now, like I said, in a real production grade implementation, you might want to keep track of these threads and map them to user interactions That way each user is sort of equivalent of a thread, and you want to maintain that probably in a database so that you can use that to sort of manage the conversation across multiple users. So that's something that I would say as a way to implement this, and that's how I've done it also in my own implementation of this in my organization. We've created threads and mapped them to users specifically. So now once you're done creating a thread, the next step is that you want to add messages to that thread. There are two types of messages you can add to the thread. There is the user message, so that the message coming from your user, and there is the assistant message, which is basically the response you get back. So here is how we add a message to the thread. So we do client.beta.threads .messages.create, and then we pass the thread ID which we created earlier on. So that's the thread ID from here. We pass the role, which is the user in this case, and then we pass content, which is basically the message itself. So whatever question is coming from your user. Now, the next thing you want to do is to create a run. So the way assistants work is that a thread is created, a message is added. If you want the assistant to provide a response, then you need to run that thread. So a run is basically how you sort of initiate the action. So in the run, you need to provide a thread ID, whatever your assistant ID is, and then the model that you're using. So I talked about the fact that you can only use GPT 3.5, GPT 4. The chat models are the only ones you can use here. Now you can see that I have also, you can set your model either here, or it can use the default that you set when you created your assistants as well. So if you don't add a model here, it's going to just simply use what you created before. Now, the interesting thing about runs, which is something I don't quite like yet because I think they need to find maybe a little bit of a better way to handle this because it's a little bit tedious. But the way runs work is that they do have statuses. They have a status of completed, they have a status of failed, cancelled, or required action. So there are a few of these statuses that you need to keep in mind. Let's see if I can find where they have listed some of these statuses, because they can be very, very important. So when you run, you can see the state. So you see all the different states here. There is a queued state, which is the initial state whenever you hit the run. There's an in progress state, which shows that your thread isn't running. There's a requires action state. This is typically used when you're doing function calling. So when you're doing function calling or using the code interpreter, before it actually completes, it's going to have an intermediate step where it provides you with the output, and then you can complete the action. I'll show you an example of this when we go into function calling in the next video. So, and then you have canceling, cancelled, failed, completed, or expired. Now, the way the runs work, you have to constantly poll the run to check which status the run is in to determine what action you should take. Okay, so let's go back into our code. So here we're running this and we're saying while it is true, so we need basically a loop which is going to basically run to check the status. It's going to check for the status, checking for when it is either incompleted, failed, or cancelled. Like I said, I'm going to talk about when it is in a different state, like requires action, what you should be doing in that case. Now I've put a 5-second check. You can change this to 1 to make it much faster. If we're using 3.5 turbo, I think is much faster, so we can put this this sleep at 1. So what it's doing is that every 1 second is going to check to see what status the run state is in, and when it determines that status is set to a specific value, then it's gonna take an action. So in my case, as an example, if the run status is this, we're gonna break, and then if the run status is not completed, then we're basically gonna raise an exception saying that the run didn't complete. Now, once the run is completed, so let's say it is completed and everything is fine, the next thing we want to do is to basically extract the message. Now remember, this is a list of messages, right? So the thread basically is a list of messages, including the user message and the assistant message. So what we're going to be doing is basically retrieving the message that has the role assistant, and we're pulling in the content from that message. That is what we're returning. And once we're done with that, that's exactly how assistants run. So the only complicated thing about assistants, obviously, is that you're not sort of making the call, waiting for a response and getting it back. It's sort of asynchronous in a way, but like I said, I would love for them to change it up a little bit, make it much more easier to manage. Maybe have like a callback function, something like that, I don't know, but something that makes it much easier, or a way to kind of listen for an event that tells you when the run is completed. So I don't know, but I feel like this basically introduces a little bit of a complexity here. Now, once you receive the message, then you can now respond with the message. So let's ask that same question we had earlier on, like, what is the limit on what I can spend on breakfasts? And this time around, I have to go back and pick up my ID, the assistant ID right here. And I can go ahead and run this particular, I can run this particular assistant. So I'll go here, I will sort of hit this, I will clear this out. And then what I'm gonna do is basically go to, sorry, this is the right one, that was the wrong one. So Python assistants.py. Now what's gonna happen is that my assistant is gonna run, and once it's ready, it's gonna provide a response back right here. So here it says the maximum amount you can spend on breakfast is $15 according to the expense reimbursement policy of the new part, services of Simon County, which is basically the expense policy I uploaded, and it also talks about a source right here. So basically that's how it runs, and that's how we're going to be using the Assistants API inside Slack. So next up, we're going to be using this in Slack. Now with Slack, basically I have done countless videos here on how to build Slack applications. I'm just using a simple socket mode application here. So in Slack, create an application, get your Slack bot tokens, get your Slack app token, and we're going to simply go ahead and add that function call inside our Slack message. So you can see our Slack application here. So basically we are using the Slack Bolt, which is a Python framework which you can use to create Slack applications. Check my other videos if you want to see, like, I've made countless videos on how to build Slack applications, so you can check that out if you want to see how to build a Slack application. I'm just showing this just as more illustrative of how to use this inside Slack. I'll also put some instructions in the description about how to create a Slack application pretty quickly, so that it makes it much easier for you as well if you want to follow along. So inside this code here, as you can see, we have our Slack Bolt, we have our Slack Bolt socket mode. Socket mode makes it easy for you to open up a WebSocket connection with your Slack application without having to sort of create a server on your local environment. So here we have app.message. So this is our message event listener. So here, whenever a message comes in, we're going to be using this function to respond to this message. So again, a message comes in, we see our assistant ID right here, and then we're taking the response that is coming directly from the function we saw earlier on, the process thread with assistant function. And basically we're going to be, whenever someone sends a message, we're going to respond with what's coming back from the assistant. So that's essentially what's happening here. So it's a pretty straightforward way of doing this. So now I can just simply go in here and do Python app.py, and this should initialize my Slack function. So I think because my function was still in there in assistants.py, so it ran while this was opening up. But basically, this means that my Slack app is currently running. So now we can go into Slack and test out this particular assistant. So now I can ask the question, explain in detail information about the use of personal vehicles, expense approvals, and meal expenses. So let's ask it a variety of topics here. So now, because we have added this as a Slack application, our assistant is running in the background, and once it's done running, it's going to return the response back here. So as you can see, here's the detailed information on the use of personal vehicles, expense approvals, and meal expenses based on the policy and procedures manual. And it talks about personal vehicles. It talks about the expense approval policy. It also talks about meal expenses as well. This information should provide a clear understanding, and it's based on this information that has been uploaded here. So in very simple steps, we have created a Retrieval assistant that is able to use the information that we have uploaded to it very simply. And if you've been following my videos in the past, you see that when we build like a RAG application, it can be a little bit more complex. So what OpenAI is doing with Assistants API is making it as simple as possible for you to be able to kind of create these quick applications, and as you can see, create them into tools like Slack, Microsoft Teams, Discord, WhatsApp, Messenger, whatever conversational platform, SMS, whatever conversational platform that you're using. My advice is that if you already have a tool at work, or if you're using something within your organization, just build on top of that. It makes it much easier. The core of your application is actually in the assistance work itself. Making it available on Slack or any of these tools is just a way to distribute more quickly. Well, I am going to be creating another video where we look at function calling specifically. So what if we're not able to answer the question and we want to, say, raise a ticket, and we want the bot itself to create that ticket for us? How would we do that? So we're going to be adding extra functionality into our bots to be able to do some function calling in the next video. Until next time, stay tuned and have a great rest of your day. Bye.